decir algo, dígalo ahora.
Después le doy la palabra.
Muchas buenas tardes a todos. Disculpen la emoción, estamos emocionados y contentos a la vez, satisfechos con el sistema. Yo siempre dije, se presentaron muchos problemas, no del sistema, el tiempo, cuántas cosas, pero yo siempre confié en el sistema, siempre confié en la justicia, siempre confié en el gobierno, en la fiscalía. Hasta el día de hoy le agradezco que al final se ha hecho justicia para mi hijo Josue Flores. A todos ustedes les agradezco todo este proceso, todo lo que ha acontecido, que quede en la mente y los corazones de nosotros, que Josue, su memoria, su forma de ser, el estudiante que fue, su sonrisa, todo ese legado que mi hijo dejó. Recuérdenlo siempre con amor. Gracias a todos.
Gracias a toda la comunidad que nos acompañó, que nos dieron sus oraciones. Muchas gracias a todos y a todos los presentes, que son un amor.
¿Piensa, doña María, que hubo justicia?
Claro que sí. Claro que sí. Hubo justicia para Josue Flores.
¿En inglés, por favor? They don't speak English. They don't. So, did you want to?
Yes, but Mr. Perez will be giving a statement as well.
Okay. Go ahead.
John, come up here, Chris. Come up here. I'm Kim Ogg, Harris County District Attorney. Justice was done today for Josue Flores, 6 years after his tragic and brutal murder. The near north side, the Flores family, Josue's friends, and all the supporters in Houston who love our children today get some measure of peace, we hope, with the life sentence handed down to Andre Jackson. What we can't do is bring him back, and we grieve with the family. I want to thank, from the bottom of my heart, these prosecutors who work day and night on this case. They are not the first or the only lawyers in the 6 years that this case has been pending to have worked on the case. There were many, but they are the lawyers who brought this verdict home. I want to thank our victims assistance coordinators who helped the family and who were there every step of the way with them. I want to thank Ruben Perez, a longtime community advocate and prosecutor, very dedicated to not just our Latino communities, but all of our communities. But he speaks for us in many of these cases and will speak today. I want to thank the jury for their careful, thorough, and attentiveness during the trial and for their decision, a difficult and hard decision, and a just decision. And finally, I want to thank the judge for this life sentence. It was appropriate. It was really the only verdict any of us could imagine, or the only sentence any of us could imagine for this horrific murder. And I want to thank the members of the media who have covered this case many of the days of the 6 long years that this family, friends, and community have waited for justice. That, I'd like to give our prosecutors a chance to answer some of your questions and make a statement themselves. John Jordan is lead prosecutor, Chris Condon, second chair. John?
John, how difficult was this, given the fact that it was 6 years that passed almost, many twists and turns and failures, if you want to call them that way, in the investigation?
So many police officers over the years worked tirelessly for this day. So many prosecutors before Chris and I who worked on the case worked tirelessly for this day. Because this case took 6 years, I think we saw the evolution of our criminal justice system. And the great result is finally, we got justice. Not many times in this courthouse do we know the case by the name of the victim, and that's a shame. But this case is known by the case of Josue Flores because he was 11 years old. This month, he should be walking across the stage of graduation, and instead his killer got a life sentence.
What was the challenge in this case in a specific when we talk about DNA and to prove that DNA of Josue was in that jacket?
I think the challenge was a number of years ago dismissing the case, knowing the DNA was inconclusive, with the hope that one day we would be here today. And it looks like that is what was realized.
How hard was it? I mean, obviously you got the guilty verdict, but pretty unusual that you presented a case without a motive.
Luckily, the law does not require a motive. I think we, all 4 million of us in Harris County, would love to know why Andre Jackson did this brutal, horrible crime. But could there ever really be a reason to kill an 11-year-old child as he's walking home from school? So I think we're asking a question that there's no answer to.
Mr. Jordan, we heard a lot today about Mr. Jackson and learned a lot about him that I thought you didn't know throughout the first 7 days of this trial. Why was none of that included in the testimony?
Well, if you notice, we didn't talk a whole lot about Josue Flores either. When we're talking about the guilt-innocence phase of the trial, it's all about the crime and who done it. But you all saw the punishment stage of the trial. The judge did the appropriate thing.
Do you think he'll ever take responsibility for his actions, for that of Josue's death or his mental health?
I've learned not to speak for defendants, but from what we saw in the courtroom, what we saw during these proceedings, I'm not waiting for him to take responsibility.
What's the message to those out there that might think they can get away with something like this in the future?
The message to our community, unfortunately, we are all too familiar with the fact that tragedy happens. But I think this is a story of a family that is supported and loved. This is a story of a community that cares. And I guess sometimes justice takes a while, but eventually we get there.
Just walk us through how you're feeling right now. And after 6 years, so many ups and downs, twists and turns in this case. Just has it hit you yet? The fact that you delivered this and you guys have justice now?
I could say it was an honor to go into court and attempt for Chris and I to attempt to give Josue a voice. I said yesterday, and I truly believe it, that this DNA, this little DNA on the jacket, was Josue speaking to us all and telling us it's him, and please give me justice.
John, I was just thinking with someone earlier about how everybody knows Josue Flores' name. And you're right, that's very unusual. It's typically the defendant's name that you call the trial by, but everyone knows this is the Josue Flores case. Speak to just the importance of that and the magnitude of that.
Well, all too often in this courthouse, victims don't get their day. And we have a career where we're trying to move them from victims to survivors. Josue will always be a victim. Today, hopefully, his family can get to the point of being a survivor. Josue Flores is somebody that will always remain with us in our community because of the future that was lost. I think every parent, it's their worst nightmare. And we can't imagine going through this.
Just to be more specific on my previous question, was there a conscious decision or decision with the defense to not include any of his mental health diagnoses in the testimony?
I cannot speak to that. Thank you. Yes.
I'd like Ruben Perez, he often speaks, not for the family, but he's been present and with the family. He's been with our office since my administration began, and he's been part and parcel of our community engagement and response with, these are just a very few of the thousands of people that cared about Josue, whether they knew him or not. Ruben?
Thank you, Kim. Buenas tardes. Me llamo Rubén Pérez, soy el jefe del Special Crimes Bureau. Yo estaba cargado de este cargo con los fiscales. De parte de la Fiscalía de D.A. Kemag, le quiero dar gracias a todos los policías, a toda la comunidad, pero especialmente a la familia Flores, el señor Juan y María Flores, por toda la paciencia, todo el apoyo y todo el cariño que extendieron para nosotros durante este juicio, porque estaba muy difícil. Han estado mucho tiempo con la familia y fueron muy pacientes con nosotros en la búsqueda de justicia. Y gracias a Dios se hizo justicia hoy. Se hizo justicia hoy. Y como le digo, con todo corazón, le quiero dar gracias otra vez a la familia. Porque tiene que ser una pérdida muy grande, naturalmente, pero todo el tiempo nunca ellos alegaron con nosotros, todo el tiempo los apoyaron, todo el tiempo los tuvieron mucha confianza y diciendo, Rubén, yo estoy con ustedes, estamos con usted, estamos con usted. Yo sé que esa va a ser la justicia. Y como le digo, gracias a Dios, sí se hizo la justicia. Y la sentencia de vida perpetua para el acusado es algo que se hizo la justicia en este caso. Pero nunca, tenemos nosotros que tenemos años de andar en este trabajo, este caso nunca se nos va a olvidar el nombre de José Flores. On behalf of District Attorney Kemag, I want to thank all the police officers, all the victim advocates, the community, but I really want to thank the family, Mr. and Mrs. Flores, for their patience, for their support, and their love for us. We've been dealing with them for a long time. They've been very patient. It's been a long journey for justice in this case, and justice finally arrived, and of course, life in prison for the defendant who killed this child is the appropriate sentence. But again, on behalf of Kemag, I want to thank the prosecutors, I want to thank the police officers, I want to thank everybody in the community, but I'll emphasize, I want to thank them for extending all the love, support, and patience in waiting for justice to be done in this case. There have been those in the community sometimes who wanted to rush this case. We couldn't rush because we wanted to do it right. We wanted to do it, and we did it right. And we did it right, and justice was served in this case.
I just want to ask you if you can, Pedro, ¿puedes hablar?
No, I'm going to invite him up. Ruben, did you have anything
No, I'm
else?
done.
This is Josue's closest friend. Come on up, Angel Nadio, and I think he has a statement for you.
Cada vez que pensaba en Josué Flores antes de esta victoria, lo único que podía venir a la mente era la injusticia de que nunca encontraron a su asesino. Y eso no era algo que yo quería tener en la mente, porque cuando quiero pensar en Josué, quiero pensar en su sonrisa, quiero pensar en los chistes que decían en la clase, que hacía a todos los alumnos reír, quiero pensar en la unidad en los que nos tenía, de que cada vez que lo mirábamos, cada vez que estaba en esa clase, nos hacía sentir alegres y emocionados para estudiar y para tener una pasión para la escuela, porque como su mejor amigo, yo lo conocía como esperanza, como algo por qué sonreír. Y lo último que me dijo fue que nos hiciéramos una promesa el uno al otro, de que no importa cómo cambiemos en el futuro, no importa cómo seamos en unos cuantos años o cuánto cambiemos, siempre seríamos mejor amigos y siempre nos íbamos a apoyar, nunca nos íbamos a decepcionar. Y al siguiente día ya no estaba conmigo. Y ahora, de una forma u otra, siento que él mantuvo su promesa, siendo mi inspiración y siendo lo que me decía, que siga adelante, porque cada vez que miro esa foto en mi pared, pienso en lo que me dijo y me da la motivación de seguir adelante. Y ahora yo siento que agarrando esta justicia para él, por fin poniendo a su asesino detrás en la cárcel donde pertenece, ya puede estar en paz. Y por fin la memoria de José Flores en mi mente va a ser de pura alegría, pura felicidad y de su sonrisa que era tan contagiosa con todos nosotros en la escuela.
¿Puedes decir algo en inglés, por favor?
Yes, of course I can. Before this victory today, every time I thought of Josue, all I could think about was the injustice that his murderer was never caught. That's the only thing that came to mind, and that was not the way I wanted to remember him. I wanted to know him by his smile. I wanted to know him by his enjoyment, by his excitement for learning, and his passion for making everybody happy. I didn't want that memory to stay that way, and I'm glad that it changed today, because the last thing he ever told me before his tragic murder was a promise that we made to each other. He told me that no matter how we changed in the future, no matter how we became as people, no matter what happened, we'd be there for each other. We'd be best friends, and we'd never let the other person down. And in a way, I feel like he kept that promise to me, because every time I woke up in the morning and I looked at that picture of him on my wall, I remember that promise. And he gave me the motivation to keep going. He gave me the strength to get up and say, this day is for Josue. And now I feel like I made it up to him, because with this justice today that we were able to serve for him, finally putting his killer behind bars, he's finally at peace. And I can finally think of him only as his smile and his happiness and everything that he did for me. And I can't wait to go on in the future, become a veterinarian in 10 years, and say that it was all because of him and all for him. And I'm happy that me, his family, and everyone who loved him can finally be at peace. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who wanted to speak? Well, a moment of indulgence, if you will. I want to give you a little insight about how prosecutors feel at the conclusion of cases like this. We don't celebrate. It's not joy that we feel. We are, as prosecutors, the guardians of justice. We don't have a single client. We represent everyone. And so when we get a verdict, especially after a long period of time, a verdict made possible in part by the advancement of science, we thank God. And that's what I asked your indulgence for. I just want to thank God for my prosecutorial team. I want to thank God for the strength that God gave the Flores family and the Northside community. And I have a message for other crime victims out there, and for the community in particular. And that message is never give up hope. There's always hope for justice through the advancement of technology and science, through eyewitness testimony, through people who change their minds later and decide to come forward and do the right thing. And in this case, I just want to thank God for the justice delivered today after 6 long years to the Josue Flores family and to his community. And thank you all.